Now, what I want to do in my time, I figured if you're sort of, if this isn't an issue you cover all the time, or, you know, if you sort of pay attention to this stuff now and then, you might wonder, you know, what makes this Congress's business? What makes this something that the government and Congress should be paying attention to? And I guess I want to describe two big reasons in about 5 minutes. Now, one of the reasons I'm in this at all, and one of the reasons I'm sort of a free agent, I could spend my time doing other stuff, is that I used to work basically for the other side. My job in the old days was to try and sell clients on the merits of a controlled and discriminatory internet. I would go from place to place, and we had this, I worked in Silicon Valley, and our devices were designed to control what kind of content went over the internet and at what speeds. That's what we were trying to sell. We called it sort of the value added, or the quality of service, or we had another names for this service-based internet. But the basic idea was to try and assert more control over one-over pipes and to charge money, to try and give companies the power to charge money to differentially charge things, block things, whatever they wanted. So I used to work, and my job was to tell everybody how great this stuff was. You might wonder who our big clients were. And we had two types of big clients, or people we tried to get interested. One, here at home, were the cable companies and the phone companies, which you might expect. But our biggest client, and the one that had the most interest of all, was the Chinese government. And there's a pretty clear reason. They were absolutely interested in technologies that allowed them to control the internet a lot better. The Chinese government looked at this internet and they wanted the economic benefits, but they didn't want any of the sort of total freedom of speech that came with it. And so what I want to suggest to you, that one of the reasons Congress should be in this fight, and the reason the U.S. government should have a say about this, is that we are fighting to keep the channels of speech the way they are in the United States right now. In the United States, we don't always have a government. I mean, the government is actually sometimes involved in direct censorship. But in the United States, we have a different kind of issue. We don't have a communist government, but we do have a possibility and a threat of private censorship that we do not have any constitutional control over. The Constitution of the United States is generally something that controls public parties, state actors. And so therefore, when you have the possibility of censorship from private parties, there's very little the Constitution and the courts can do about it, and it is the oversight of Congress and the oversight of FCC that keeps this country a republic and that keeps the channels of free speech what they are. And so the first reason, and sort of one of the highest reasons I think Congress needs to keep an eye on these issues, is simply for maintaining the republic the way it is. And I want to emphasize that these technologies, filtering, monitoring, inspection, deep packet inspection, are exactly the same technologies that are the technologies of censorship. Now, AT&T and Comcast want to use them for different reasons. They want to use them for commercial advantage. They want to use them to disadvantage services they don't like in favor of their own services. But I'm suggesting, first of all, it is a small step from censorship for commercial advantage to censorship for other reasons. And if we do not want to have an infrastructure of speech control in this country, it is important that we stand up and guarantee that the channels of free speech stay open. And that's, I think, the first reason Congress needs to be involved in these issues. The second is simply that while these may sometimes seem like sort of complicated technical issues, like something people at a Star Trek convention get worked out about, there is a deeper level at which this is simply a discussion about American infrastructure. And even if you're the, big libertarian, or you don't believe government should do a lot, one thing government has always done and has done successfully is to provide for the infrastructure of the country to make the country rich. These are the internet. It's been said a million times, but I'll say it again. The internet is in the position that the railroads were in at the turn of the century. It's in the position that canals were in the 19th century, the telegraph at a certain time in its history. It is the infrastructure of our time. And so these issues come to Congress with a long history that we've seen before. You know, this country has had these problems before and will have them again. In the 19th century, just to take an example, it was control of the leading network at the time, then the railroad network, that let the Standard Oil monopoly become what it became. You know, the railroad became a discriminatory network. It carried Standard, they had, the scheme was that competitors to Standard Oil paid higher rates, and not only paid higher rates, but took the extra money that they paid that was secretly transferred over to Standard Oil. And so when you look at the age of the great abuse of monopolies and trusts, when you look at where they came from, when you look at the Associated Press monopoly, late 19th century, which threw elections one way or another, behind every great and abusive monopoly almost always lies a network. And not only a network which has been co-opted, which has been turned into a discriminatory network, and which is then used to carry out and further the power of the monopoly. And so when we are talking about, you know, these complicated issues of Comcast blocking and what's going on in NARAL, what you're really talking about is whether we will allow these networks to become the seed of a new generation of dangerous and abusive monopolies. I mean, most of you have grown up in a time when we have not had a national telephone monopoly. AT&T was broken up in 1984. Let me remind you, if you have not noticed, that AT&T is back. Let me remind you, if you have not noticed, that media has consolidated into a very small number of companies. We are approaching a state of affairs which has a lot of similarity to the earliest 20th century, when politicians like Theodore Roosevelt and others, you know, who are conservative politicians, went to the wire, went out and became trustbusters because the threat to the republic was so great from the power of private monopolies. And so when you look at these issues, you must realize that we are dealing with an issue of infrastructure and an issue of monopoly power that has recurred throughout American history and is recurring again. And if Congress gets these things right, if you steer the country in the right direction, if you prevent monopolies from gaining too much power over the infrastructure which is designed to serve the public, the country is just richer, freer, and better. And so therefore, this is and should not be an issue you think of something that you think about part-time, or you might consider important sort of in a very narrow way, but to understand that this is an issue that is crucial to the political and economic future of the country. Thank you very much.